Strive and Thrive is a collection of discussions featuring guests from various fields, focused on guiding entrepreneurs in creating businesses that excel in every aspect: people, planet, and profit. Throughout the series, you can join us, Romesh and Mike, as we explore relevant topics with our guests which can help businesses thrive.
Romesh and I met while I was supporting a client transforming their business, and I needed finance director support and reached out to him and his team. Since then, we've become good friends who share a passion for business and entrepreneurship. If you like today's discussion, then you want to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels.
Hi everyone, welcome to our latest episode of Strive and Thrive, and today on our show we've got David Sloly, CEO and founder of Harvey David, a strategic marketing agency. However, I know David best from his weekly AI marketing newsletter, which gives me my weekly insights into the fun, the chaos of AI and its impact in the world of marketing, which is my routine go-to document. Thank you very much for joining us today, David. Nice to have you on the show. So first 1 minute challenge for you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and tell us what Harvey David does?
Yeah, background. So not a linear career. I accidentally started a business when I was about 14 years old. And by the time I was 17, I built it up a little bit and sold it. Not like the way entrepreneurs sell businesses today. This was a long time ago. So it was enough money to pay for me to go traveling. Whilst I was traveling, I fell in love with the idea of people telling stories. I love listening to people from different countries telling stories. And when I got back to the UK, I naively asked the BBC if they would teach me to be a journalist so I could learn to find and tell other people's stories. And they naively did exactly that. From journalism, I went into broadcast. And then from broadcast, I was approached by some people in advertising and said, hey, we'll pay you the same as you get paid to make a 30-minute program, to make a 30-second commercial. And on paper, the maths looked really good, but in reality, it wasn't quite my world. So I did that for a while before moving into marketing, where I worked for a global agency for a number of years. And 11 years ago, set up Harvey David.
Brilliant job.
That's an excellent job. And I know you've got a very interesting background. So you've summarised that superbly. Thank you, David, and welcome to Strive and Thrive.
Thank you for having me.
We're delighted to have you here. So I'd love to learn more about marketing and why marketing has resonated with you.
Yeah. So my father, when he was in the military, he worked in signals. So everything was about communication. Yeah. And he was born and raised, he's Jamaican. So he was born and raised in Jamaica. And so he had quite a strong Jamaican accent. When he joined the RAF, he was able to tone that and use it for very clear communication, which meant growing up as a child in that household, in that environment, communication was very clear and very direct. Yeah, not in a rude way, not in an aggressive way, but you understood what he was saying and why he was asking you to do it. So for me, that was just normal. I grew up with very clear communication. And so marketing, for me, the attraction for marketing for me was on two fronts. First of all, when I joined my first marketing agency, and I'd done my D&AD, I had studied it. It was all about communication. It's all about the psychology. It's all about how are you enabling someone to move towards what they want to do. And my first real job in marketing, believe it or not, was with the Google account. Google had come to the UK, and Google's a very much a data company, and they were trying to tell the facts of why you'd want to use Google. And they'd engaged the agency I started work for, saying, bring in this guy, and maybe he can help tell the stories, and that emotional impact will have more gravitas or weight than the pure data. And it's something that I went on in my career to unpack in quite a deep way. And so marketing for me was all about the communication, all about how you impart information to someone in a useful way to move them towards achieving their objective, whether it be to buy something or to achieve some other goal.
Lovely, that's fantastic. And what's your view on so marketing as a concept? I mean, I've heard that, you know, in my various readings of things in the past, that a lot of it was inspired by propaganda, like war propaganda, you know, back in the day. Do you see that link and connection?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you can almost remove the word marketing and say, what are we really trying to do? Whether we, you know, propaganda, we're trying to communicate. And I'm working with my sons looking at some Latin phones, and you look at those and break them down. It's all about how they're trying to communicate, the language they use, and the stuff. And one of them opens, surely any man would agree. And just that opening, surely any man would agree. Yeah, removes that. This is my opinion. You should. Every man should. No, it's surely every man would agree. And those subtleties of language change the way we perceive things. And perception is everything. When we come to making our decisions, we like to think we're rational agents. Yeah. Oh, I'm making a rational decision to buy an Apple laptop. Really? A PC for a quarter of the price will do exactly the same job. But of course, we're not making rational decisions. We're really making emotional decisions based on the context of that moment. And we post-rationalize our decisions really quickly. Oh, well, the Apple, you know, it's a better machine, has a better sale value, whatever we may say. And whatever reasons we come up with, everything, all the decisions we're making. And you could look, the career decisions we make, are they really rational? Look at my career I just went through then. Romesh, you know, was your career as rational as here you are, an FD consultant? Was it? I trained as an FD, went over there, that's it. Founder of his, Mike, was yours really sort of this rational career path? No.
Completely irrational. That's what works the best, I think.
It does, and we decide these are the right things for us in the context of the moment, and we post-rationalize it afterwards. As you heard in my opening gambit, I almost post-rationalized everything I said, which is an indicator that at the time I wasn't post-rationalizing any of it. I wasn't rationalizing any decision. I was going, oh wow, go and work in marketing. That looks really interesting, and my client's going to be Google. Oh, that sounds really exciting. I think I'll go and do it. So anyway, the idea of decision-making theory, the idea that we make these decisions, became something that I became very interested in. And you can say, well, where does marketing sit? I have salesperson, for example, and a buyer. And if the salesperson just rings the buyer and says, are you ready to buy this? And if you're an SMB and you're selling a product or service which has a bit of a buying cycle where maybe one or more person involved, they need to make sure installation will work, etc., then marketing is going to be that middle ground where it's going to help them make sure they understand the thing they want is the right solution. Now, propaganda is at the other end of that. That's an area where I don't feel comfortable in that space. There is a belief I have that we can operate on one of two planes. We can operate on the competitive plane where we are trying to compete with everyone. That's the sort of propaganda bit. Or we can operate on the creative plane where we create and invent and we create more of abundance that wasn't there before. For my area in marketing, I look at everything through the customer lens. So usually I'm on the calls going, yeah, but the customer may be feeling this. And that's really important. I say that they may be feeling this. How do we ensure that we acknowledge that feeling and answer it? Not propaganda, not trying to persuade people to do things they don't want to do, not cajole them. That's the competitive plane. That's where there's only so much and we're all chasing that same thing. let's be creative in the creative plane. How do we help them understand it? What do we need to do that? And then I see in that gap, we're kind of going, okay, that's the customer need. The client has the solution. How do we make that journey of decision making for them painless? Remove the friction so that every time they're thinking, now we need to know if that thing will fit in our office. Now, I'm looking at you, Mike. You told me before we came on that you bought a robot arm. So we'll get to that in a moment, I hope. Now, will that thing I'm buying fit in the office, or will I need to keep it in a friend's garage? And will I be able to plug it in the wall, or do I need 3-phase electricity? And it's like there is a point where all these things need to be discussed and overcome in a particular order, and they need to be done in such a way that it is genuinely helping the person that's making a decision, the buyer, move through that journey without friction, almost as they would say, do you know what, I should ask them about there's the answer, they've just pinged it through to me. That's an ideal for someone that's running a business or someone that's buying something. That's really what we want out of life, isn't it?
Can I ask? Can I ask you? I've not heard the differential between propaganda versus creative, but I quite like it, and it's sort of landed with me. I'm going to ask you a question on it. The creative side I can pick up. Do you think most marketing at the moment is orientated towards the propaganda side or the creative side? What's your assessment of where people are orientated right now? And I'm thinking about Google influencing and SEO and that sort of thing, which you're much more into productivity there rather than actually the creative engagement side.
Well, it's all creative in some way. Yeah. It's how we approach it. It's the approach, not necessarily the output. Because we tend to look at creative and go, this is an image, that's creative. This is code, that's not creative. But it's all, the approach can be a creative, or the approach could be, I want to try and take something from someone else. Yeah. There is a lot of both going on at the moment. And we see that every time we go to buy something, we can get we feel it. Yeah. Are they trying to persuade me against my will? And I'm a great believer, don't cajole people into doing things they don't want to do. If they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. It's simple as that. Why would you try and force them into doing something? It will only backfire.
Interesting.
Yeah, what I'm getting from it, and like you, Mike, it really resonates with me, what you've said, David, because what it seems to be is, the propaganda approach is more like a win-lose scenario. And then you've got the win-win of the creative approach. And the win-win approach is more focused on the customer and their needs. The direct, if you like, propaganda approach is more focused on the needs of the seller.
Yeah. And it mustn't be underestimated, Romesh, right? The business has a need. Yeah.
Yes.
You're an SME. You have a need, and you have targets, and you have supply chain. Everything's all running. So you do have these needs. My role is to be the customer, play the part of the customer in this equation. And if the need of the business doesn't align with the desire of the customer, then we need to do some adjustment. But ultimately, the customer is what we need to focus on.
Yeah.
Because their needs can change as well over time, and the business needs to understand that and rethink how it's going about it. And it can be sometimes a tough conversation. I've had them in the past where we're saying the way you are positioning the product right now may not be the way the customer would best receive it. However, if we put it on this new plane and talk their language and view through their lens and acknowledge their pain points, their fears, and get those out, I would rather, I'd rather a customer get to the end of that journey and be so happy with what they've bought. And how many times does that happen? Yeah, where you get to the end of your customer journey, whether it be a pair of shoes or a new car, and go, that was perfect. And when it does happen, it's great. You tell everyone about it.
And do you find that both approaches? Do you find that the most effective marketing is the more creative-led marketing, or is it a blend, a balance?
Oh,
Or is it horses for courses? What's the...
You look at the customer. How do they need to move through their journey? Is this a small ticket item, quick decision, fast delivery with warranty? Is it that kind of purchase? In which case, how quickly can you get them through? Yeah, and out the other side. And then there's retention. How do you keep them as a customer long term? Are you going to over communicate, under communicate? Are you going to bring something new to them? So each of your customers has a different need, and that sort of propaganda versus the consultative helping people, there is a wide gap between the two, and there's even a wider gap between the two ends of the spectrum for both. And I guess what I'm saying is, as a business owner, we get really close to the business, the mechanics of the business, the need of the business, and we need to go, today, I'm going to be a customer. I'm going to walk around the store and see how a customer will see my goods. I'm going to go online as a customer and buy one of my own products. I'm going to call a customer and ask, was everything okay? How could we improve our service? What could we have done better? And that's when you start moving away from, I'm competing with this other brand, product, seller, to I'm only competing with myself. How can I make this better for my customer? How can I get to a point where my customer says, it was a no-brainer?
Yeah, understood. Okay. And in all these years of you working in the marketing space, how have things changed and evolved?
Yeah. So my first experience of marketing goes back a long way. So I was working at Kiss FM back in the day. Yeah. And we would get...
Wow.
Yeah. And we
would be very, very interesting.
It was an incredible time. I mean, it was back at a time, and your listeners wouldn't have heard of this, but I was brought into Kiss. I was actually living in America at the time because there was this new thing that had come along called the internet, and I was over there because America was sort of 2 years ahead of us on the internet. My sister lived in the US, and so she said, why don't you come over? We've got a huge, powerful setup here. You can really get into how the internet works. So I'm over there playing with the internet, and I'd launched a radio station in London before I left called Heart FM. So I'd launched that, and then I'd gone away because I wasn't really into Heart music, but I'd done the launch. And I was in America doing this, and I got this email from Kiss FM saying, we want someone like you to come over and relaunch Kiss FM. And I was like, well, that's an interesting one. So I flew back and ended up getting involved in a sort of rediscovery of its heritage, its roots, its music, what it stood for, its passion. And as part of that, we'd have a number of campaigns come through. And the show I was producing at the time, I working with Steve Jackson on a show called Steve Jackson's Morning Glory, which was a really different kind of radio show. At that point in history, and I'm bringing this up because this is the competitive bit, all radio stations in London, all DJs sounded sort of continental-ish, and all said, hey, it's 16 minutes past the hour of 9, and just looking through the news today. That's sort of that kind of thing. And I sat my team down. You can picture that, right? It was sort of that cheese going on everywhere. And I sat my team down and I said, look, this is our competition. We have absolutely no hope of beating them at their own game. We cannot do it. They have everything better than us: more money, more staff, better studios, locations. They have aeroplanes that fly through the sky to look at the travel and do that. We don't have any of this stuff, and we're not going to get it. So we're not going to compete with them. So this is what we're going to do. And this is a true story. I took the presenter, Steve Jackson, who didn't want to do the show. He didn't want to do the morning show. He already had a show, and I needed to convince him. So I found a tethered balloon in London that was going up on its tether, staying up for sort of 10 minutes and then coming back down. And I convinced him to come up on the tethered balloon at sort of 7 a.m. in the morning with me. And we went up on the tethered balloon and we're looking out over London. We can see the embankment. We can see almost all the way, Covent Garden over there. We can see South Bank. And we're looking out over London. I remember saying to him, wouldn't you like to wake this city up every morning? And considering he turned me down at every opportunity before, he said, yeah. And he could kind of see the vibe of it. And we came down in the balloon. And I promised him that we would not be like the other stations. So we seen down at the team, and it was like, well, what are we going to do? So I said, there's all these people waking up. They've all got lives in London. We're going to tell their stories. We're going to find and tell their stories. And we built the entire show around narratives and stories. And that attracted a huge audience because we did it in unusual ways. We were doing things you simply couldn't do now. One that comes to mind, we had a character, we called him Street Boy. His job was to go out and wrong rights. He had a little microphone and a mobile phone tucked in his pocket, hidden away, and he'd turn up at people's houses and do things. And we did a piece once a week called couldn't do this now. It was called Piss on Your Neighbour. And basically the bit went like this. If your neighbour had done something to annoy you, he would come over and do a wee on their hedge or their gate or something, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's outrageous. But it's a young audience in London. They're 16. They've never heard all they've woken up to is either pirate or that is, hey, it's 16 minutes past the hour of 9, all of that. Suddenly, they got this opportunity to phone up and say, my neighbour has been, his dog's been barking all night. I mean, my neighbour's done this. So we did all these different things. We still have Beg Us to Stop was another thing we would do, where someone would phone in and secretly tell us a story about someone. And then we would start telling that story on air, but not give them their name. And unless they phoned in and begged us to stop, it would go all the way through to their name. And we were doing all these wonderful stories. So it was a completely different way of doing things. Back to your question, early days, early experience of marketing. Smirnoff, Sony PlayStation, all these companies were suddenly coming to us going, we want to be on this channel. There's nothing else like this. We want to be part of those shows. So we said, rather than just running your commercials, we're gonna bring the show in to you. We're going to do things that bring your product to life, whether it be bringing in celebrities to join in, or during the World Cup, we hired 2 camper vans and we were the unofficial sponsors of the World Cup. And we drove those camper vans to France. We did all the shows from the camper vans. And unlike the official groups that were there, we could do anything we wanted, right? So it was completely uncapped. We could get all the stories. And it enabled us to bring in and do our marketing the way I believed marketing should be done. There is a potential customer, our audience, at the end of this. And let's bring what it is they've got to life in the most fantastical way so that we'd paint these images in people's minds and they would decide if they wanted or didn't want that or not. And I think it was Ericsson from McCann Erickson who said, a truth well told. That's what it all comes down to. You find out something like about a PlayStation and it's a truth well told. You take each of those brands and you tell the truth in the best possible way. And we used stories. And I kind of haven't stopped where all these micro stories, whether it be on social media, whether it be for their campaign, or whether it be around their messaging when they are talking to a customer for onboarding, for sales enablement, all of these, we are communicating with people and the words we use will impact the perception, the decisions they make. It'll influence their attitudes and the decisions they make. Every stories influence our attitudes, our perception, and the decisions we make. And you can unpack that.
I've written it down twice now since you've been talking. Talk about storytelling and how important that is, and I think you've touched on that through your own story and the learning of how to tell a story. How do you think that's evolved in terms of marketing in the over your career? Do you think it's changed the dynamic given the onset of the internet, moving into now, which is a world where we're micro information at pace? How do you think storytelling's evolved in the way you've articulated there?
So storytelling fundamentally hasn't evolved. We've got more channels of which to place the story, and we may need to make those stories shorter than we'd be used to. But they still carry, a good story has a challenge at the beginning, it has a struggle in the middle, and it has a resolve at the end. Aristotle laid that out, 1,000 odd years ago, and that hasn't really changed. You can look at the latest stories from the big brands that are going out now, and they have, they pretty much follow that same pathway. The channels have changed. However, since November 2022, we have seen a different kind of disruption. I mean, you could look at disruptions and say the channels were disruptive, from Morse code to telephone to the typewriters and computers. You can see all those technologies changing, but generative AI, I see as a different kind of shift, and I've done a lot of investigation to see how that could and does change the way we create stories. But fundamentally for me, Mike, and I don't know how you feel about this, whether you think it's changed, the narrative, the power of narrative hasn't changed. The channels have.
Yeah, it's interesting. And if you boil it down, I probably agree with you, right? There's so many different channels. That's perhaps the challenge. But the storytelling that's strong and that lands with an individual or with an organisation, but particularly an individual, is still the same old Aristotle-based structure, as you call it, but actually it is still as important to any marketing campaign or kind of strive and thrive that we're trying to do here. Tell people about your experience of an entrepreneur and marketing. It's still the same storytelling, and you making it real with your Kiss FM example is how it resonates and lands with people. It's still the same thing.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Mike, when you said keeping it real. So one of the messages I'm getting is authenticity, that trying to be authentic and real with the story, which will resonate more with people, but also being unique, using it as an opportunity to show why you or your business is different. And I think that KISS example is a great way of showcasing that.
And they were all authentic stories, and you touch on a really good point, Romesh. So when I was working in marketing, properly working in marketing, I was giving some talks, and I'd always ask people, do they use stories in their communications? And people would say yes. And I was like, what kind of stories do you use? And someone said to me, oh, the old beginning, middle and end story, right? Which, isn't really a story. But I understood what they meant. And so I thought, what I'm going to do? I studied journalism. I'll spend a few weeks and I'll put together a sort of short book walking people through how you create a story, because I had to learn that, and I'd used it quite a lot in broadcast. So when I'd work with my teams in the morning back at Kiss FM, we'd have the editorial board out. We'd break each story down to see if it really would carry. And so I thought I'll put this little piece together. It actually took me over a year to put together. But during that process, I was talking to some senior leaders, and I was asking them why they don't use stories in their presentations. And these were senior leaders like, SMEs, startups, they were leading it. And they'd say things like, oh, well, there's no real place for stories in the world of profit and loss, or, it doesn't fit in with Excel spreadsheets, and this is to your point, Romesh, the authentic bit. Stories are for children. Stories are lies. They're made up. they're not real. And that really hit me, because I don't think until that point I sort of considered that huge, important part. When you become a founder of a business and you start running a business, at some points you are very much focused on the rationale, spreadsheet, P&L, where 2 + 2 = 4. It doesn't matter where you are on the planet, that's the same. There's no subjectivity. Yeah, it's a mathematical model. And you're caught between that and walking out on stage and talking to people about your product and service, which is why we see so many people walk out on stage with a PowerPoint. There's this linear journey that logically talks about why they should engage with you and buy your product and service. And I heard those business people say that to me, and it really struck me that authenticity is at the heart of all these stories. And that's why I used the KISS example. We didn't make up stories about London. You didn't need to. It's a city full of stories, full of people bursting at the seams to tell their stories. But the authentic story is incredibly important. And that's when you move to propaganda, which is an area that interests me as a case in point of study, especially as we evolve into an era where artificial intelligence can be used as an amplification of false narratives. But it's not something I feel comfortable working with. And I, other than writing stories for the pleasure of telling a yarn that is fictional, which I do as well.
Do you think you mentioned AI, and you mentioned in ChatGPT and generative AI? Well, you said that will change the art of storytelling. That's my words, not yours. What's your view now on how that will change, and the impact that has on those creative individuals who historically have been maybe the generators of stories?
Let's start with your second point first, if I may, the impact on people. I'll make it clear, I'm an AI realist, not evangelist. Yes, I'm not here to pitch and promote artificial intelligence. And I say this very carefully because I come from a creative background. I was a creative director, and I've met a lot of creatives on this journey since generative AI has come in to our industry, who are very much against it. And I'm going to be quite clear. I hear you and I understand why. I'm going to talk about it from both fronts, but I don't want you to think I'm ignoring people who are against it. It's very disruptive. It potentially could take jobs. I took it upon myself. I studied AI at Oxford University's Said Business School in 2021. This is pre-generative AI. So I was doing back propagation. I was doing like hardcore coding, which I'm not the greatest person to do that kind of work, to understand what it could do. Then along comes generative AI in November 2022. And I decided that from what I knew studying AI, this could be an incredibly disruptive force. And I needed to understand how and what difference it would make. So I did what I usually do in these circumstances, is I set up a sandbox, a place where I can creatively play and experiment away from the business. So if this all goes horribly wrong, it doesn't impact my staff and their mortgages and all the good stuff that needs to continue. And because I had a broadcast background and I'd been involved in writing and creating comedies as well, which was really interesting, I thought, I wonder if generative AI could help me at every point of the production of a sitcom podcast. Probably can't, but let's give it a go. So I started a podcast called Made in AI, and the proposition was a family of artificially intelligent humanoid robots have been abandoned by their manufacturer and left to survive on their own. Yeah, that was my premise for the show. I then set about making the first episode, and I found that AI could add value even back then. every point, and all of the voices had to be synthesized. Now, back then, this is April 2022, 23, AI voice synthesizers could not say AI. You had to write A-EYE, and then they may say AI or AI, and all they just sound like Boris Johnson was saying it, and just go, AI, and just yell something. Producing a 15-minute podcast where all the voices were synthetic was a challenge unto itself, because you couldn't direct them. You couldn't say, "Oh, more emphasis at the end, please." It was a crafty case of editing. So the creativity was still 100% required. If I stepped away from it, nothing happened. So I got to a point about 2 seasons in where I realized I was doing AI all wrong. I love it. I keep seeing that pop up on LinkedIn. You're doing AI all wrong. I was the actual guy doing AI all wrong, but no one put it on LinkedIn how I was doing it wrong. The thing I was doing wrong is I was applying the techniques of radio production I'd learned 20 years ago to artificial intelligence production. And the day I just went, stop. How would you do it knowing what you know now? I moved from a different mindset. I was like, you know what? Let's come up with an idea. Let's chat to AI about that idea and see if we can help develop it. If we can't, we can't. Let's punch out a rough script. Let's see if it can spot any better ways. Let's build our own AI assistant, a companion that understands everything about the previous shows and the characters, so it can remind me if certain characters are off character. And the whole show just flipped in it. It just became so much easier. And it's all about the shows are underpinned about the ethics. So it was able to help me with points of ethics around AI that I didn't know about were taking place. It'd pull them in and go, "Oh, did you know this ethical challenge is taking place? You could put it in the show here." Oh, yeah. So I could. So from a creative stance, without me being directly involved in conducting the show, there would be no Made in AI podcast. AI cannot wake up in the morning, decide it wants to make a show, write a script, editorially make it funny, produce all the voices, edit the whole thing together, and publish it online.
What's interesting, I'm sort of reflecting because you've covered a lot of really interesting points there. Is it one of my experiences is actually people are trying to your point, adopt it in their existing ways of working, and they've got an existing process and they've got an existing workflow or methodology, and they're trying to use it in there. Whereas the people I've seen who are most successful, and you're talking about the creative process of producing a podcast, but actually it applies in HR processes or marketing workflows or even software development. Actually, it's thinking about a different paradigm and working model that actually can produce not just faster quality, but a different approach and different value drivers off the back of it. And I think those are the areas where I've seen some of the most interesting disruptions from the use of AI. But I do think, in touching on your creative side, do you think it's helped you be creative in a slightly different way doing these podcasts? Before it was maybe more of a structured process, whereas now it's allowing you to be more creative because it can take on some of the more structured processes. Do you think as a creative person, do you think it's helped you in a different way?
Yeah, one of the challenges I face as a creative is I want to pull detail about things I don't understand, because detail help draw the rest of the picture. When you're creating something from nothing and the story, say for example, one of the recent episodes, the lead character 001, his whole premise is it's upgrade or fade. He needs to upgrade himself all the time, or he risks fading into oblivion. By the way, that character 001, 1 year after I'd been making a podcast, one of the big robot manufacturers released a robot called 001. And talk about life imitating art, they retired it this year. So it was like they've actually now got a real 001 that's been retired. So anyway, this story about upgrade or fade. In one of the episodes, he wants to put a human brain inside him. Yeah. Now, creatively, that's my idea. I've sort of come up with that. But technically, how you do that, I don't know. So I'm walking along the street, my headphones on, and I'm chatting to my companion, and I'm saying to her, look, I want to do this thing where it's going to take a brain out. I said, by the way, I don't even know, how do you take a brain out of a head? And it says to me, the response is, I'm sorry, I can't answer that. You're not a qualified, a brain surgeon with a certificate, whatever, to my name. And I responded, oh, yeah, I am. I'm qualified. I went, okay, they're taking a brain out of a human head. And it just like unpacked it for me just like that, right? And I thought, so that stayed in the show. That ended up getting into the show. But creatively, I would understand none of those processes. And so sometimes previously as a creative, I'd have skipped over that and left that level of detail out of the show. Now, I was able to get into what is that level of detail? What's the name of the person who does that? What are the risks? And they wouldn't dominate that gag, but they may be in it. So that if someone does know, they're like, dude, that's real. And that to me is the secret gag within the gag. That's the sort of the egg.
It's adding layers. It's adding layers, right, to the concept, and that's what AI is enabling. Wow.
I think it's superpowering the talented people. The best use cases I've seen are there are talented people, and it's superpowered them because it's tackled areas where traditionally maybe you'd have gone and done the research and therefore wasted a week doing it, or which is interesting but not hugely valuable. And I think it's superpowered, and we see it in software engineering particularly. It's the software engineers who are already good are suddenly amazing because they, instead of developing one really good application, they can have 3 or 4 on the go at the same time. I've seen a storyteller who talks exactly the same. They're like, I can work on 3 or 4 books at the same time because I can do my research, I can think about the story, I can spend a bit more time in the creative space rather than the sort of research and action orientated space. And I think that's the exciting bit, I think, in this world.
And as a creative, things quickly slip out of your mind. And we know we have to keep a pen and paper handy. I do. I have to keep a pen and paper. Yeah. And what AI enables you to do is to create custom AIs, little custom GPTs. If you use OpenAI, you can do Copilot, you can do it Anthropic, platform agnostic, but you can create these custom ones, which means, to your point, when you're talking to someone who's conceptualizing their idea of the book, they can start getting all the characters in there, the plots, and then it can make inquiry on top of inquiry. And then it can go away and 2 weeks can pass and they can go back to it and it's all still there. And it can keep inquiring again. And I love that when I'm working on the show, I go back to the show and I can be like, where were we? And it's like, this is where we're at.
And can I ask, what are your insights? And I think that I'm going to ask Romesh the same question. What are your insights from what you're learning from this exercise that help you think about being a founder of Harvey David and taking that business forward, or providing marketing advice? Because I know, Romesh, you and I talk a lot about the work you've been doing on AI and what it's teaching you. What's your reflection on this and what that might mean for people who are running a business and the potential?
Who's going first, Romesh? Go on, Romesh.
Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
Okay. For people running a business, there is a risk of getting sort of drawn into your first, if you haven't used AI really before, maybe just a tiny bit of asking a couple of questions on Gemini and you're saying, well, this isn't all that. There is a risk that your first draw into AI, generative AI, is, oh my gosh, game changer. And you've got to be careful that it doesn't become your focal point. Yeah, it's another tool in your toolbox, and you're going to exploit it over time. There is still the 99% of your job that needs to be continued. There could be an impression that this artificial intelligence is going to solve more than it really is going to solve. particularly if you're looking at social media channels where it is in the interest of certain organizations to make it appear that their offering can do more than you could ever dream of. Yeah. So you have to be careful of finding that, not being drawn into that. And then the next thing is, and I touched on this earlier, that what is it you want to do? Because you can do many things, but choose one thing and don't be afraid of when you try and do it, it fails. That's okay. You know, I sandbox a lot. I'm surprised at how many things work. I experiment. I get up very early every morning. I spend an hour experimenting, and I experiment in things that are nothing to do with business. And what is so surprising is how much that ends up transferring into a direct business use for a client. So don't be afraid of experimenting outside of the business. Just something you're curious about, if you're, you know, your own hobbies and your own interests, and then it's a safe place to play and experiment rather than having to phone team members going, sorry about that, I think I may have crashed our accounting software. I've just tried to API Anthropic into it, and it's all going a bit bonkers. So I try and do things in my own hobby area, and then of course I'm happy to do them outside of work hours. I'm kind of like, oh, you know, I wonder if, you know, yeah, I won't go into the details, but that's my experience is find one thing and see how it can help you. What about you, Romesh? What's your response to that?
Yeah, well, I love your pragmatism, actually. From my perspective, that the challenge with AI is that it is a true blank canvas, isn't it? And with that blank canvas, there are so many possibilities that where do you focus? And so, you know, the points that you said that I really liked were actually, you know, AI firstly isn't going to solve everything, right? It's not going to solve all of your problems. You need to control it and understand very clearly what you want out of it to get the best outcome. So I'm kind of visualizing it, you know, and I think you used the term earlier as, you know, you're the conductor of the orchestra. And your orchestra is made up of many things, many tools, you know, team members, you know, processes, whatever is in your tool kit, if you like. And AI is a part of that. And if you think of it as an orchestra, you know, you can add and change the composition, you know, to suit what you're exploring. And it's a way to explore, isn't it? And I also like you're alluding to not worrying about failing, just experiment, essentially. So yeah, I think it's worth having a clear idea of what you want to achieve,
and understanding. Yeah, I think sorry, Mike, I just need to put this thing. So I think it's really important. This is something that took me some time to get my head around at first. But I think if you're an SME, this is crucial. Yeah? First of all, if you are kind of feeling that this is just a gimmick, this is novelty. I've played with Gemini's answers on Google. That's not. What is AI? What is artificial intelligence? You go, okay, it's sort of you could say it's basically three things. OpenAI, what have they got? They've got loads of compute, loads of computational power. Yeah, they've spent billions on getting these NVIDIA chips to power it all. They've got great algorithms that can create this neuralistic natural language. Yeah, and then they got data. What data have they got? They've scraped the internet. So basically, you've got this amazing compute, this amazing algorithm, and then a combination of Reddit posts, Harry Potter books, and YouTube shorts. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
there's the letdown, right? It's staring at us all in the face. Now, however, very easily you can, trust me, everyone can. I do it. Create a custom GPT or a custom model where it uses all of their computation that costs billions. It uses all of their millions of lines of code that create this natural language ability. And now you're giving it a knowledge base of your own data, which it will look at first. So suddenly you've got something that isn't referencing Harry Potter books for your output. It's referencing your own. And when I say data, all knowledge is data. Yeah. To generative AI, it doesn't have to be fields of spreadsheets. It can be summary of some notes. It could be a thought you've had. It's all data. Yeah. So that's one of the big things you need to think about. And the other things you need to understand is, what is generative AI? It's looking at that knowledge and looking for possibilities and probabilities. It's not looking at the future. It's looking at the past, the data you've put in. So even though it says things like thinking, it's not thinking, it's doing a probability. What is the most likely possible outcome I could present next? That's what it's doing. I think if you've got those two things locked into your thinking, then you can play to your heart's content and be pleasantly surprised at the outputs.
And critically evaluate, essentially, right? Test it and make sure that what it's coming out with is the output that you want. I think that's key, isn't it? That's what you're saying. I do want to touch on this before the end of today's chat. And one of the challenges with AI, I find, is that it's developing so quickly and evolving so much, and that's each product in itself, plus the fact that there are more products coming out all the time as well. And staying abreast of that, I think, is very, very challenging. David, I think you've got a solution to that.
Yeah, so one of the things I do is I write an AI newsletter weekly. So that means all the stories have to cross my desk, and I put them into one of three buckets in my head. Is it news by definition, new and interesting? Is it truth? Yeah. Is it lies? Clearly, this is just a lie, and there's a lot of it out there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of it out there. Or is it hype? Is it AI hype? And again, there's a lot of AI hype, and you could see why organizations would want to hype what they're doing. You could see why other organizations may want to lie about what's going on, and you can see why there's truth. And I try and sort of separate it and get to what's the truth by following the threads and using my sort of whole journalistic hat and asking the obvious questions. What's motivating someone to write this story? That's usually a dead giveaway. And can we actually get any truth out of this? But it is difficult, if not impossible, to keep up with how fast it's moving. But quite honestly, you don't need to. You just need to sort of stay aware of how things are changing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And what I found interesting with a lot of founders we've talked to, and a lot of corporates as well, is they're waiting.
Yeah,
More waiting. I'm surprised how many are waiting and how few. There's very, very few people who are experimenting as much as yourself.
Yeah,
and the insight of your experimentation is what creates the learning for people to know what to do. I'm terrible at experimenting. I do exactly the same as yourself. I wake up on Saturday morning, and by lunchtime I've built something. I'm like, that's kind of my model of understanding learning and what's going on. It amazes me how people aren't doing that at the moment. They're sort of waiting for until it settles, until Copilot works perfectly within the Microsoft ecosystem. They're not going to adopt it in their organization. I'm like, you've got to experiment with it, because it's not a linear replacement solution here. There's transformational change in here somewhere, and you've got to but that's up to you and how you've got to find it. To your point on your podcast, it's a lovely example of where I've seen it. Is you had the linear approach, you tried it, went, this isn't right. There's something fundamentally wrong here. Let's flip it to a completely different paradigm, and I have a different, brand new experience that's more rewarding. And I think that people need to think like that in business as well when they're applying these solutions.
Which is difficult to do, right? I mean, who can really walk into their business and say, let's tear out everything that's working? So we're going to see small incremental changes within business. And I would say, the first thing as an SME if you're looking at somewhere you think you could add it, map out a workflow. What is the current workflow?
Yeah, that's what we do.
And kind of go, well, this is what it looks like. Where does it plug in? Where does the human oversight? Will it really save any time? Or will it make quality? Will it make a quality improvement? Or will it remove something that someone doesn't like doing? What are the real reasons, the drivers for doing this? And if it's simply because I want to play with AI, I'd go take it. Don't do that, to Mike's point, outside of the business where you can make monumental errors and no one cares.
Yeah, one of the things you've talked to us about before the show was how the more you've learned about it, the more you don't know, almost. And the more you're confused by it. Can you just sort of reflect that back to us now and sort of your insight from all your reading on a Monday? Do you go into Monday going, great, what am I going to learn? By Monday evening, you're like, oh, hang on a minute.
Yeah, as I wish. I go in, so I kind of get this moment where I honestly think I know nothing. Yeah, because you take on so much information you haven't really processed in a week. And I say that every time I go to write my news bulletin, I think this is an April Fool's. Every one of them is like some kind of April Fool's. It's just a story in there that is unbelievable. That's just beyond belief. And then I find out it's true. So I go into this every time thinking, I know nothing. I know nothing about AI. I really don't. And then I start catching up as I read the story. Go, oh yeah, I'd actually read that a few weeks back. It's not news. That's old. Oh, this one. And you read, and the jigsaw starts to come together. But it's such a complex jigsaw for anyone to hold in their own mind, all the pieces at once connected. I guess it's impossible that it all sort of comes apart during the week, and I may play with a new thing or two. But I try not to get bogged down with new tools, because there's thousands all the time. And I kind of try and look at what's actually impacting us. What are the changes that are taking place within search engine optimization that we need to start thinking about? What are the changes that are taking place within how we look at creating narratives that we need to think about? And I look at those sort of bigger fundamentals that will ultimately change the way we serve our customers in the future.
Really good. We've come to the end now, so I'm going to close out the session. But I just want to say thank you very much, David, for joining us. It's been such an interesting. You've had such an interesting history, but also an interesting present too, which is sort of resonated for myself. Normally I do a little reflection, and I think my sole takeaway really is the importance of storytelling still resonates through whatever technological change or contextual change we're going on at the moment, and don't forget that. And I think the interesting conversation we had at the beginning about propaganda versus creative and whether we've got the right categories or not, jury's out maybe, but I think certainly the logic of competing with yourself, not with others, to find a better way of telling your own story that resonates, a better experience for your customers, is such an interesting insight. Romesh, have you got anything else to add?
Well, firstly, thank you so much, David. Yeah, really great set of insights and learnings and thoughts, and all kind of packaged up in a brilliant story as well. And for me, I think, Mike's articulated very nicely the marketing side of things, but the AI element of the discussion was fascinating, right? And I think one of the messages I'm getting there is stay in control of it, be in control of the AI tools you are using, understand why you're using them, be specific, don't be overwhelmed. And I think your newsletter, which comes out weekly, is a good way of maybe keeping up with all of the options that are out there, but keep it simple, stick to time-honored, kind of known and proven methodologies, the power of storytelling. Don't lose sight of that, but use the technology to kind of layer into that and make it more effective.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Romesh. Thank you very much again, David. Thank you very much, everyone, who's been listening or watching, and we hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Strive and Thrive is a podcast for entrepreneurs, founders, and business leaders. Please like, follow and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Strive and Thrive.